So that should be it, shade. Oh, it's the mirror stick. Oh, okay. Replace?
I watched the video.
Okay.
What is going on?
About 5. And that's gonna be Sunday. So we're gonna send that out. So, listen, I don't know what's wrong with that damn phone there. It's okay. But listen, call
Start over again.
Coach up there and send it out to me. Because remember I said I did get it. I did get it. But I need that rest of the information. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. I see shit just do it. You know, I mean, just do it.
Why do it?
Am I doing this now?
Say that again.
Yeah.
Ready for the night?
What's that? Tajish. Do I need this? I guess. No. I mean, do you hear an echo? Why is that? All right. Assalamu alaikum. So for the people who are joining us via Zoom, can everyone hear? Okay. Can everyone see? Okay. So there's some kind of feedback going on. I apologize for that, but hopefully that will go away once things line up. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الطيب الطاهر الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for what I hope will be a beneficial session during this blessed month of Ramadan. I have chosen to speak to you today about a very important topic, something that we strive to do during this month of Ramadan, which is connect with the Qur'an as best we can. And it is a topic that we cannot discuss enough because it entails so much. And when you strive to connect with the Qur'an, you will quickly discover that it's an ambitious task, right? If you read the translation, a lot of the translations are super thick. They're like 600, 700 pages. And, you might go home on Friday evening and you'll say to yourself or to your significant other or so, the Imam said it's Ramadan I need to connect with Qur'an. And you go reach for Yusuf Ali. Like Yusuf Ali is like 1,100 pages or something. And then you might sit it on the table and say, Brother Imam, really? Really? Because it's this thick, right? And, a lot of that is can be overcome because it's mental, right? It's mental, meaning that, when you look at the Quran as a book, right? When you prepare to read a novel, let's say you want to read a novel and it's, your favorite novel and it's like Hemingway or, some other great prolific writer. And, Hemingway requires a Hemingway ambiance because Hemingway usually writes big, thick novels. That's why they call them a summer read because, you got to have time to sit down and read through this novel and really get all of what it entails, get all of the details. The good thing about the Quran is that the Quran is meant to be reflected upon. And so because it's meant to be reflected upon, let me see if I can address this real quick. I got to go back here. Because it's meant to be reflected upon what you, let's see, take that off. What you discover is that the verses in and of themselves, they speak to you in a way that is sort of direct and to the point, and you can't go too far in the Quran without coming across something that catches your attention, right? And because the Quran, as Allah says about the Quran, it was revealed in order for people to reflect upon its verses. And you'll discover that quickly. You'll read 5 verses and Allah may bring up something that makes you say, I wonder what that's about. And anytime you have a moment like that, I wonder what that's about, that is a good indication that the Quran is speaking to you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a few things related to exploring the Quran specifically during this month, so that we will be in a better place mentally to really go about this task of reading the Quran, because it is different. And that's the first thing I like to say, and I tell people this all the time. So reading the Quran is not like reading a novel. I mean, and there are a lot of amazing writers who have written amazing works and have contributed to the literary corpus of humanity. So they're tremendous authors, right? But the difference between reading your favorite author and reading the Quran is that we presume that the author of the Quran is none other than God. And so no matter how talented a writer is, she or he cannot match the style of God, the delivery of God, the impactful meaning of God. No human can do that. So this is why the Quran can't be replicated. This is what Allah says in the Quran, and He says this by way of a challenge, even to the people of today, right? Because when Allah says that, for example, in the Quran, He says, if you doubt whatever we have revealed to the messenger that we have sent, then replicate 1 verse or replicate 10 verses. We should not assume that this challenge was not accepted by the people of that time, because in that traditional culture, particularly in the early days of Islam, the Bedouin Arabs in particular were known for their oratory skills. They were not a culture of writing. They were not a people of letters, but they were a people of oratory skills. So they had poets and they had storytellers. And so they took it upon themselves to try. So they went and they would listen to the prophet when he taught the people the verses that he received by way of revelation. And then the poets would go and sit down and try to craft verses that had a similar style. And this is documented in the chronology of the Qur'an. People tried to do that. During the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, after the time of the Prophet, until this day. Because whatever it is about the Qur'an, whatever the miraculous quality, there's so many aspects of the Qur'an that are miraculous, right? That people, like for example, many of the scientific discoveries, recent discoveries in pre-modernity as well as post-modernity, pre-Renaissance as well as post-Renaissance. These were things that have been mentioned in the Quran directly or indirectly, right? A lot of phenomena, right? Things like there are two bodies of water that exist side by side. One body of water is salt water. The other body of water is fresh water, and they meet, but they don't merge. And we still don't know. And I forget what part of the world this is in. But these two bodies of water do not merge, right? We haven't been able to figure out, meaning us humans, why that is. Where is the barrier? Because there isn't a wall, there isn't a dam, there isn't a filter, there isn't anything but the two bodies of water side by side. In Surah Al-Rahman, Allah says, Maraj al-Bahrain yaltaqiyan baynahuma barzakh la yabghiyan. That the two bodies of water meet, they come together, but there is a barrier between them, so therefore they do not merge. This is in Surah Al-Rahman, right? Scientists are still oceanographers are still trying to figure out why this is. There's plenty of scientific knowledge in the Quran, although the Quran is not a book of science. This is an example of the challenge of the Quran to humans being continuous. And once you accept that there is nothing like the Quran, because there's nothing like the word of Allah, this becomes not the point. So the Quran is not to be read by the human mind with the idea that we can figure out what God is saying to us in a way that makes sense. But instead, the Quran is a challenge to us to see if we will surrender our hearts first and foremost to God. And these are two different states of reading, right? Two different frames of mind, right? And what helps with this is that the Quran is not to be approached as only an intellectual project, even though the Quran speaks to the intellect of all human beings. The Quran speaks to our intellect. Allah says that the verses of the book are for those who use their intellect. But he doesn't just say only. He doesn't say that and it's full stop. He says also that the Quran is for those who have a connection with their hearts. Because the essence of the Quran is for those who are believers, right? And so it's very important that we make that distinction, right? And there are works that have been written in the tradition. I have two of them sitting on the table here, but one of them is the work of Imam An-Nawawi, may Allah be pleased with him, called Etiquette with the Qur'an, right? And Etiquette with the Qur'an, this book here, when you read it, it gives you a different conception of what it means to read the Qur'an or recite the Qur'an versus what it means to read any other book. So the advice that I would give you without you having to read this book, it would be good if you could, because you would see, oh, there's a big difference, right? It's different to read the Qur'an and to frame it as as divine revelation, as opposed to reading any other book, a textbook, a novel, a storybook, an instructional book, because it's a different type of read. Okay, so that's very important that we understand. Okay, so I'm going to use some slides that I prepared. For the Zoom group, I'm going to share my screen with you all. And let's see here. And for the rest of you, I'm going to read this slide. The slide's okay. But the slides are available. I can share them with you if you're interested. All right, so the slide is titled Reconnecting with the Qur'an, Healing Our Souls with the Qur'an. Okay, healing our souls with the Qur'an. So I'd like to begin this slide presentation with, and as I mentioned, this is available. I can share this with anyone who's interested. This is an opening reflection. We are here in this moment by the grace and permission of Allah and by the prayers and sacrifices of those who came before us. And it's always important for us in this cultural context to remind ourselves that we are Muslim because other people who came before us were Muslim. Right? It's very important. It's important because if we don't remember this, then we lose what makes our Islam unique for us. If we don't acknowledge who we are and where Allah brought us from and how Allah has situated us in the present, then our Islam is no longer unique. Right? And it's very difficult to achieve the purpose of Tawheed, which is the unification of Allah, if we don't understand this principle of the goal of surrender to Allah is for your human soul to self-actualize. Okay? So you're not a Muslim to just follow other people and what they say. You're not a Muslim to surrender what makes you unique, what makes you unique and different from other people's, because Allah created that difference. So that difference is okay, right? But in order for you as a Muslim, the one who surrenders to Allah, to self-actualize within your culture, you have to be authentic to who you are. And that is what will make your Islam unique, right? So if we were to take our culture as Black people, we have things that make us culturally unique and different than other people. And that's okay. And a lot of times people think that they have to go on a journey to become something else or someone else, when really that's not the point of surrender to Allah. Now, the best way for us to learn this is for us to value where we come from, to understand not just what is problematic about where we come from or what we come from, because every culture has elements that are good and elements that are not good. So our culture is no different. But we should not assume that, our culture is so problematic that we have to abandon it completely and adopt someone else's culture in order for us to self-actualize. Actually, we can't self-actualize that way. Right? And Tawheed is about self-actualization. If we understand what Tawheed is, because Tawheed is about devotion to God only. Right? So that means you have to embrace the faith and then make it your life mission to self-actualize within this framework. This is a divine framework. And that's why it's beautiful. Right? That's why you hear me on the minbar and I say, it's not about the clothes that you wear. It's not about the food that you eat. That's the point that I'm driving home. It's about you self-actualizing and being authentically Muslim. Because that doesn't have a definitive look. It has a look of the culture and the people that it exists within. Okay? So we are grateful to Allah that we have forefathers and foremothers who came before us, who showed us some of how that looks like. Some of how that looks like is their sacrifices, their sincerity, their devotion to the deen, to the religion, their giving, their doing, right? And these are the things that we must never forget. We must always strive to honor their spiritual legacy because they left behind a spiritual legacy. We must always strive to carry on their spiritual legacy. But we can't carry it on if we don't honor it. Because the people who don't honor what they come from or where they come from, these people say this, right? So this is true in, for example, Indian culture. This is true